You are listening.
You're listening.
You are listening.
You're listening
To a TVO Today.
To a TVO Today.
to a TVO Today.
TVO Today
podcast.
A listener note. The following podcast contains coarse language and sensitive themes which may not be suitable for younger audiences. Listener discretion is advised. Previously on The Oath. Did you see the case?
Yeah, I read it. It's really weird. I think that there's definitely more than they're writing about.
Pretty early on, he tried to convince me that I was homosexual. I was quite adamant that that wasn't the case.
And so how often would he bring up your sexuality?
Oh, every appointment. He got me to read some passages from the Bergler's books on homosexuality. He gave me reading material to take home with me.
With any doctor, there's an automatic power differential. It starts with just nice compliments and maybe letting the patient stay longer. The boundary crossings are very gradual.
I unfortunately found myself in a very vulnerable position with somebody who utilized his knowledge and influence to groom me. I couldn't have seen that coming.
When Carol DeTosti met Dr. Melvyn Iscove, she didn't know quite what to expect. The year was 1972. They were in Albany, New York. Dr. Iscove was still training to be a psychiatrist, and Carol was one of his patients.
I was nervous and full of anticipation, so I walked up, I believe it was on the second floor. He opened the door, and we introduced ourselves.
Back then, Carol was a graduate student. A friend had told her about his sessions with Iscove, and she was intrigued because she had been struggling with her mom's death for a while. She also had some relationship issues she wanted to work through. I mean, who doesn't, right?
I was vulnerable to begin with because I asked to see him. I believed that he was going to be able to help me and that the treatment was going to help me.
It's been 50 years, and you'd think her memories would have petered out by now. But Carol says she remembers her treatment really well.
The first sessions, I took notes. I wrote things down. I wrote poetry.
Did he put you at ease or?
Yeah, I have to laugh. You make me laugh because what? I'm sorry. At ease? Put me at ease? You know, I would leave the session miserable. So I'm not going to forget. I am not going to forget.
For TVO Today, this is The Oath. I'm Krisha Collier, Episode 2, The Doctor. In the first episode, we told you about Dr. Melvyn Iscove's professional downfall. He's the Toronto psychiatrist who lost his medical license in 2018. The College of Physicians and Surgeons of Ontario allege he sexually abused two of his patients. In this episode, we're going to focus on the doctor himself. Because people are complicated, they can be more than one thing. And Iscove was, even to his accusers. According to the Discipline Committee's decision, one of them testified he called Iscove when he had a medical emergency, and Iscove says he picked him up and drove him to the hospital. So we decided we needed to find out more about him. We scoured the internet for information. We read comments on news sites, blogs, and social media posts, trying to find anyone who might know him. That's how we found Carol DeTosti. My co-producer Brennan Leffler tracked her down in New York.
Hello?
Hey, Carol, it's Brennan. How are you?
I'll tell you right off the bat, Carol isn't really fond of Iscove. She hasn't seen him in a long time, but she and her friend, who also went to Iscove, still talked. Sometimes they wondered, whatever happened to him? Occasionally, they'd search the web, and one day, Carol got a huge surprise.
I just happened to look online, and I just Googled Melvyn Iscove. Bam! I could not believe what I saw. I could not believe what I saw. What? I mean, what? I did not imagine any of this was possible. I mean, if you looked at him, he was as ramrod straight, not only in posture, but in approach toward everything. And his life was perfect. He had the wife, he had the kids, he had the house.
The news about her old psychiatrist brought her right back to her treatment. In the first year, Carol says she saw Iscove twice a week at his home office. She remembers the layout of the apartment he lived in. She says you had to pass through the living room to get to the office. The path to get there was kind of narrow, mostly because one item dominated the space.
And the reason why it was so narrow is because a huge, grand piano was in the living room of that apartment. Huge. Okay. So I'm like, whoa, look, somebody plays a piano.
That may seem like an odd detail to include, but it's not. Because classical music, piano in particular, has been a big part of Iscove's life. Almost everyone brought it up. Patient X, one of the complainants, said Iscove was cultured and very knowledgeable on classical music. He remembers it playing in Iscove's waiting room. Iscove is actually an accomplished pianist. He talked about it during his hearing. He testified that he got an associate diploma from the Royal Conservatory of Music when he was 15. That's considered a pretty big deal. Iscove's cousin, Charles Dennis, remembers Iscove played with an icon of Canadian music.
He played with Sir Ernest Macmillan, for God's sake. And it was on the radio across Canada, Soloist Melvyn Iscove.
Charles grew up in Toronto, but he spent most of the last 5 decades abroad pursuing a career in the performing arts. He's lived in California for more than 20 years.
Mainly these days, I say I'm a filmmaker, I'm a film historian, I'm an actor, I'm a playwright.
Charles admits he and Iscove didn't know each other very well growing up, but they reconnected in the late 90s. Later, when Charles would come to Toronto, he says he'd stay at Iscove's place.
Mel is a big opera buff. Several times he invited me to a dress rehearsal for the opera. People there all knew him, all the opera buffs, they all knew each other. Oh, hello, doctor.
Exhibits introduced at Iscove's hearing show. He also invited a patient to be his guest at a rehearsal for the Canadian Opera Company, which the committee thought was a boundary violation, by the way. He donated to the Royal Ontario Museum, the National Ballet, the Toronto Symphony Orchestra, as well as the opera. From what we've heard, family was an important part of Iscove's life, too. He was married for more than 20 years. Charles says Iscove and his wife did get divorced, but he adored his children. How would you describe him as a father?
Totally devoted to his 3 daughters. Always immensely proud of his daughters and their families. And I say he was always on Skype. He was always on Skype at some ungodly hour.
Iscove's family came up at the hearing. He testified that he traveled overseas to help when one of his grandchildren was born. The exhibits show he shared baby pictures with family, friends, and patients by email. At the penalty hearing, Iscove's lawyer presented 5 letters of support. 4 were from patients. We got a hold of those messages, but most of the names were redacted, so we couldn't contact the people who wrote them. The one person whose name wasn't blacked out is a longtime friend. On his behalf, his wife declined our request for an interview. The letters describe Iscove in glowing terms: professional, kind, and considerate, incredibly caring. They called the therapy helpful and extremely successful, and they said they wish they could continue. And after the committee's decision came down, apparently not everyone believed the abuse really happened.
There are other people who I know who went to see Iscove who defended him.
Defended him how?
Total rejection, total disbelief. Never happened. People are making stuff up. It's all bullshit. He would never do anything like that. Never tried anything like that with me. Stuff like that.
That's Henry, which is not his real name. He is one of Iscove's former patients. He agreed to speak with me on the condition of anonymity. so we've altered his voice. Henry was in therapy with Iscove for roughly 6 years. He started in the mid-'80s after his father passed away. How did he present himself during sessions?
Very professional, always suit and tie, shaven, a regular nerdy guy.
Did you ever find him caring and open and easy to talk to?
Yeah, I didn't have any problem talking to him, except to say that I expected him to do the mining, to delve into my psyche. It was more a question of him expecting me to be forthcoming, and that wasn't always the case.
Henry says, at the time, he would sometimes disagree with Iscove's assessments, but was pretty neutral on his approach. He felt the sessions were fine, aside from a few awkward moments.
The only times that I felt a little bit uncomfortable was at the conclusion of our sessions. It was traditional for us to hug at the end of a session before I left. I didn't invite it, but I didn't try to make him feel uncomfortable about it.
Hugging came up at the hearing, too. Patient Y testified Iscove hugged him. When questioned about this, Iscove answered, quote, "I do not hug my patients." When asked again, "Have you ever hugged your patients?" Iscove responded, quote, "No, I don't hug my patients." But there were things he didn't deny. In his testimony, Iscove confirmed he asked patient X and patient Y to keep their therapy private, and Carol claims it was the same for her.
You can't discuss this with anyone. No way. I'm not supposed to discuss this treatment with my dead relatives, okay? Let alone a human being. This is just between us, okay? Just between us because of the doctor-patient relationship.
Iscove had a reason for that. He testified he was following recommendations set out by Sigmund Freud. Iscove described to the committee how sometimes a patient would be making progress, then talk to friends and family who don't understand the treatment. And they'd make comments like, "That's what your dream meant? That sounds crazy." It sort of undermines the process. Iscove testified, quote, "This is the kind of interference that Freud was aware of after many years of work, and I've seen it myself." Okay, fair enough. Charles says personally, he always found Iscove to be secretive and, well, uptight and just strange.
No, it was very secretive. It took me a year of different visits on and off to get he would have to reset the Wi-Fi for me. He'd never give me the password. I mean, in retrospect, it's so friggin' weird. He was peculiar.
What made him peculiar?
There's just something about his aura, his bearing. And everyone's got the right to be peculiar as long as you don't frighten the horses. And he was frightening the horses, it turns out.
In 2016, after years of staying with his cousin during visits to Toronto, Charles says he and Iscove had a falling out. They haven't spoken since. He would have been under investigation by the college, right?
Oh, I have no idea.
Yeah, he never mentioned anything.
No, he never told me anything.
Charles says they never really discussed Iscove's work or his patients either. But when I brought up the abuse allegations, he wasn't surprised. When you read the Toronto Star article, you must have been surprised?
No, not in the least.
Really?
I was like, oh boy.
Iscove denies the allegations of sexual abuse and that he acted improperly in any way. We'll dive into this more in a future episode. From the get-go, Iscove has been a bit of a mystery to us. He graduated from one of the top medical schools in the country, the University of Toronto, in 1969. He did a 3-year psychiatric residency at Albany Medical Center Hospital. In 1974, he got a specialization in psychiatry from the Royal College of Physicians and Surgeons of Canada. How he became enamored by the theoretical stylings of psychoanalyst Dr. Edmund Bergler along the way is sort of a head-scratcher. The only real hint we got was from a transcript we located of Iscove's 2017 testimony. In it, he said he came across some of Bergler's books when he was in pre-med. Quote, I was always interested in psychology and psychiatry and therapy issues. So I started buying his books and reading them, and something resonated with me. How this turned into a lifelong devotion is another thing. What we know is many of Iscove's patients were encouraged to read Bergler's books. His accusers were. Carol and Henry say they were too. When did he introduce you to Dr. Edmund Bergler and his theories?
I would say within the first 3 months, I was introduced to Edmund Bergler, and he said, I want you to take this book, I want you to read it. And I can't even remember which book it was. There were a number of them, but I know that the foreword to the book was written by Dr. Iscove. The fact that he had written the foreword to his book suggested to me that he was a student of Bergler, lock, stock, and barrel.
Henry says at first, Iscove would dictate notes to him and he would write them down. It was primarily about psychic masochism. That's what a lot of Bergler's work was about. The way Iscove explained it to the committee, we see psychic masochism in people who find pleasure in displeasure. It's similar to when people say that guy is a glutton for punishment.
As he started to teach me more about Bergler's positions on certain things, I came to understand that a neurotic is somebody who's a psychic masochist who creates situations for themselves in which they can be hurt, and then they take great pleasure in feeling sorry for themselves because they were hurt.
Carol recalls psychic masochism coming up a lot in her sessions with Iscove too. She says the therapy was heavy on the concept of taking responsibility for your own troubles, which on its own doesn't sound bad. But she says it was actually pretty bruising.
When I would discuss things that happened, it was always how it was my fault. It was always not forgive yourself. It was always that's masochistic, or, well, you did that, you got yourself into that trouble. It was always, I am superior, and you really don't know much, and you have to learn from me.
At this point, it's fair to wonder if Carol just didn't like what Iscove was telling her. And that could be the case. But she kept seeing him for years, even after Iscove left Albany and moved back to Toronto. Remember, this was the 1970s. There was no video conferencing back then. She had to travel from New York to Toronto for sessions.
And I didn't have a sound mind, because if I did, I would have ran out of there. And I would have said, this is ridiculous. I would have sought other therapies.
It's important to tell you, Carol never accused Iscove of sexually abusing her. But in some ways, her experience was similar to patient X and Y's. Patient X revealed to me his sessions with Iscove were painful. He compared the anticipation of going to getting a tooth pulled at the dentist. And he told the committee he felt he needed to continue seeing Iscove because he was emotionally dependent on him. Patient Y, the other accuser, testified he felt he could rely on Iscove's advice about almost every aspect of his life. In what we determined was his patient impact statement, talking about Iscove, Patient Y wrote, quote, "You spent years ensuring I would trust you, rely on you, be afraid of you, need your approval, and on and on." Both described Iscove as something of a father figure.
They looked up to him as a father figure, an authority, and I certainly looked to him as an authority figure. This guy that I looked up to and thought was perfect, more and more I was backing myself into a corner. I had to go to him. I had to hear, "You're cured of your neurosis," from Iscove.
According to the committee, Iscove acknowledged he had a role in influencing his patients, although he denied it was a major one. He also had an explanation for his bedside manner. The committee said Iscove testified that he would identify self-destructive behaviors and point them out to patients so they could find a way to stop doing them. As I said earlier, Henry kept seeing Iscove for years. He had always maintained he didn't really think he needed therapy, but says his wife thought otherwise and wanted him to keep going. Finally, in the early 90s, he decided to stop. Did you find it helpful in any way?
No. The longer that I continued in my therapy with him, the more I felt like I was just wasting my time.
6 years is a long time to see someone. What was it about him that kept you continuing to see him year after year?
Keep the peace at home.
It took even longer for Carol to sever ties with Iscove, about a decade. She says part of the reason she kept seeing him, she was under the impression there wasn't another Berglerian that he could recommend in the United States. In Toronto, there was Iscove himself and another psychiatrist named Dr. Benjamin Wintraub. Wintraub died in 2003, so we couldn't speak with him. But Iscove testified they met when he was in med school. He found out Wintraub had trained with Bergler. Iscove said he spent years working with Wintraub to learn how to use Bergler's methods in his own practice.
He was the direct line to Bergler. Bergler's boy was Wintraub, and Wintraub's boy was Mel.
So Wintraub was mentioned by Iscove during the times that I had sessions with him in Albany. So I knew that he was his mentor, and he would refer to him. And he said, Wintraub is going to have a session with you, if it's okay. He'll have a session with you, and he will psychoanalyze you.
Didn't you think, like, why is he bringing this other person in?
By that point, I had been so worn down, anything he said, I did. Wintraub comes in. I was scared. He's asking questions. And he asked me about a dream. He said, did you ever have any homosexual dreams? Or he may have said the word lesbian. So I said, yes, I did have one. You know, it was in college. And I said, I've never had any lesbian relationships. I'm not a lesbian.
Mel often asked me about dreams that I had had. Sometimes I would remember them, sometimes I would not. When I did, we got into a description of what the dream was about, and he would provide me with his interpretations.
Do you recall anything he would have said about your dreams?
Not specifically, but I did feel like most of his interpretations leaned toward the sexuality part of interpretations that he would make from the dreams.
And would your dreams be of a sexual nature, or?
No, not necessarily.
Questions about dreams and fantasies appear to be a common theme. It's certainly in line with the type of questions both patient X and Y say Iscove asked them. Were those questions a standard part of the process? So much seems to point back to Dr. Edmund Bergler. Charles says it was clear Iscove was deeply committed to him.
You know, I think he felt he walked on water, probably. I mean, he was one of the big three, except there really wasn't, Freud, Jung, Adler. They were the big three. And then there was a sort of footnote, this guy Bergler, who I never heard of until Mel told me about him.
Iscove didn't only use Berglerian methods with his patients. He also spent a lot of time working with 2 different charitable organizations. The mission was to keep Bergler's ideas alive.
He was always off in New York taking care of stuff for the Bergler Foundation.
He was convinced, along with Wintraub, that Bergler was the answer to mankind's neurosis. The foundations were supposed to spread the word, get the word out there through his books.
Despite the Foundation's efforts, several experts we asked had never heard of Bergler. And as far as we could find, there are no books written about his life. But maybe there was more to Bergler than we were aware of. We needed to go deeper, so we went looking. Surely there was somebody who would know something and could give us insight into who Bergler was and why Iscove was so taken by him. Turns out, Bergler does still have some loyal followers, and their devotion may be almost as strong as Iscove's. That's next time on The Oath. The Oath is hosted, written, and co-produced by me, Krisha Collier. Brennan Leffler is a co-producer and writer. Sound design and editing by Damien Kearns. Editing and technical support by Matthew O'Mara. Theme music by Allison Leighton Brown. Special thanks to the Barry and Lori Green Family Charitable Trust, who made this podcast possible. For TVO, Katie O'Connor is the managing editor of podcasts and digital video. Lori Few is the executive producer of digital. John Ferry is Vice President, Programming and Content. Thank you for listening.